semioetica, la scienza dei segni in ascolto. So the subtitle would be the science of signs as listening, in listening, like signs in the sign is in translation. The sign is in listening. The sign is, because its vocation is otherness, therefore, another interpretant of otherness, of the sign whose vocation is the other, is listening. Semiotics in listening, semioethics in listening, the sign sciences, the language sciences in listening. I will explain that better. But the semiotics of music is connected in my vision of things, and Augusto Ponzio, whom he is the co-author of this book, and we invented semioethics together as a natural development of the work we've done over many decades now. So semiotics of music, semioethics may be interpreted as a semiotics of music. What does that mean? Not semiotics that objectivizes music, that applies its categories to music. That's one discipline, that's one thing. By semiotics of music, we mean semiotics of music, semiotics that studies music. In that structure, we are talking about the, in Italian, il genitivo oggettivo, the objective, the object genitive, semiotics that studies music. Whereas in the expression semiotics of music, we understand this as a subject genitive. Music as the perspective of semiotics, music as the perspective of signs, music as the perspective of language. What does that mean? Taking music as a model from a philosophical point of view. Music, an interpretant of music is listening. Music is not possible without listening. We listen to music, right? So the semiotics of music is the semiotics of listening. The semiotics, therefore, listening to the other. Therefore, the semiotics or the sign sciences, when I say semiotics, the general sciences, science of language, philosophy of language, all the sciences that reflect on signs. The semiotics of music is the semiotics of listening, of the semiotics of otherness, of hospitality, of encounter. So all this is in the concept of semiotics of listening, and we have also the semiotics of music. So from this point of view, I also talk about global semiotics. And when I talk about global semiotics, which has evolved from the dialogue between the life sciences and the science sciences, biology and semiotics, biology and philosophy of language. Global semiotics, as I understand it, is in fact a semiotics of music, understood as semiotics of listening, semiotics of the other, semiotics of encounter, of hospitality towards the other. This other, which is actually structural to the sign. Anyway, so I just wanted to say that as a homage to you and to our listeners. Semioethics, I just want to give you the context. We have, with global semiotics, as it develops from the dialogue between the life sciences, biology, and the science sciences, With global semiotics, we become very aware of the situation of global interrelatedness. One of the axioms of global semiotics is where there is life, there is semiosis. Where there is life, there is semiosis. A question, a question to consider is what happens once life finishes? Does semiosis continue? And of course, there are various possible answers to that. We haven't delved into it, but certainly if you consider, for example, machines, semiosis does continue in machines, artificial intelligence, as which can be considered as an extension, however, of life, right? But the point is, where there is life, there is semiosis. And when we're talking about life and semiosis, we cannot but underline the condition of interconnectivity. All forms of life are possible in this condition, and thanks to the condition of interconnectivity, interdependency, intercorporeity, or intercorporeality, as you prefer. This is global semiotics evolving from bio-semiotics. This vision fits very well this is global semiotics, but it also fits very well with Mikhail Bakhtin's vision, the Russian philosopher, Bakhtin and his circle, right? Bakhtin also thematizes and insists on this condition of interconnectivity, intercorporeity, what he also calls dialogism. It's very interesting that he should propose intercorporeity and dialogism as synonyms. So the condition of life on Earth, human life and non-human life, is that of interconnectivity. This means valorizing the condition of otherness. The vocation of the sign is the other. The vocation of semiosis of life is the other. At the origin, then we have somebody like a philosopher like Emmanuel Levinas, right? Emmanuel Levinas, the philosopher of otherness, speaks of the condition of otherness, of the I-other relationship at the origin of sociality. This means to say the condition of responsibility, of responsibility, responsibility as the origin of sociality. So we have different points of reference, if you like. Seebeok with his global semiotics evolving from biosemiotics, Bakhtin, Levinas, just to name a few of the authors in semioethics. There are others that all insist on this condition, which I find really interesting, of interconnectivity, intercorporeality, which we associate to otherness, dialogicality, and therefore the need, the imperative of response and responsibility in human conduct towards the other. This for the sake of the health of semiosis, whether we are talking about human life or non-human life. So that is, let's say, the frame, more or less, in which I like to work. In this context, yes, we have also the concept, therefore, of the semiotic animal. I published a book with John Dearly and Augusto Ponzio, entitled The Semiotic Animal. This was published in 2005. The semiotic animal. Man, human, the human tends to knowledge. We translate, the human tends to semiotics. The term semiotics has at least two meanings, is ambivalent, as all words are in live communication. So semiotics as the name of the science, the general science of science. Semiotics as a properly human capacity, which is very, very interesting. So the reference here is to the human capacity for meta-semiosis, for reflection on semiosis, for reflection, so that a capacity that characterizes the human animal, the semiotic animal, is the ability to take a step back, to stop, and to reflect on semiosis, on semiotic activity, on sign process, on one's own behavior, to stop, reflect, and deliberate, make decisions, take responsibility for our standpoints and for our decisions. This capacity is attributed by the bio-semioticians to our modeling capacity. The bio-semioticians explain, this is the dialogue between biology and philosophy and semiotics, explain that all life forms, and certainly animal life forms, are endowed with a modeling device. This modeling device determines the way we relate to the world, the way we relate to the other. Every species, certainly every animal species, has a modeling device connected to its Umwelt, which determines the Umwelt and determines the way our vision of the world, our possibilities, the various possibilities we have of relating to the other. The difference between the human modeling device and non-human, let's say modeling devices, is what the bio-semioticians, what Seeberg in particular calls syntactics. Our modeling device is endowed with syntactics, the capacity of organizing, constructing an infinite number of possibilities, an infinite number of different worlds with a finite number of pieces. This recalls Leibniz's Ars Combinatoria, if you like. So we have syntactics. We are endowed with syntactics as human animals. Syntactics is the condition of possibility for metasemiosis, this capacity to reflect on not only the capacity to act, to produce and generate direct semiosis, but the capacity to interrupt direct semiosis and do something else, reflect on what we're doing, maybe to confirm that we are happy with what we're doing or to change course completely. That's human choice. So this capacity endows us with an extraordinary capacity for creativity, invention, innovation, and also makes us ever more responsible. It endows us with this capacity for responsibility understood also in terms of response, responding to the other, responsivity, response to the other. Mikhail Bakhtin, for example, develops a architectonics of responsibility, where the center of value is not only the I, the isolated I, the individual. We need to distinguish between the individual, if we have time, I'll go into this later, and singularity, which is the better term for what we normally understand by the individuality. The center of value, he talks of this architectonics of, in English, the Russian is translated with the word answerability. The architectonics of answerability, the architectonics of responsibility when describing life on the planet, human life on the planet, where the center of value is not just the I identity, but the I other, I for me, I for the other for me, I for me. Therefore, my own identity is other, is made of otherness. I for the other, therefore, so the other of me and the other from me and the other for me. These are the main axes in his architectonics of answerability. The otherness, the condition of otherness that Bakhtin thematizes in the universe calls for answerability. It calls for dialogism and answerability, responsibility towards the other. Levinas, as I said, or did I, speaks of the I-other intrigue. The origin of at the origin of sociality is the I-other intrigue. Responsibility before being, before identity, before ontology. So it's very, very difficult to trace, very difficult to understand, this condition of intrigue, of entanglement, inextricable entanglement with the other, so that he takes a position against dominant philosophy as determined by Hobbes with his concept of homo homini lupus, man a beast for the other man, man a wolf for the other man. According to that vision of things, at the origin, therefore, sociality is fear of the other, fear of the human, man, the human, beast, wolf for the other man. Whereas Emmanuel Levinas, with his philosophy of otherness, says no. At the origin, before ontology, before being, before identity, is this condition of otherness, alterity, which means that the original movement is a movement towards the other, is a movement of hospitality and welcome towards the other, a movement that cultural identity interrupts when identity is constructed in such a way as to sacrifice the other, which is very much the case. So rather, we in semioethics likes to derive ormo, the concept of ormo, like humility, from humus, Mother Earth, humid Mother Earth. And this, so humid Mother Earth, which also brings to mind, therefore, I mean, there's so much mythology and literature on humid Mother Earth in Russian literature as well, as the place of hospitality of life, of generation of life. Victoria Welby, for example, I don't know whether you've ever heard of Victoria Welby. I've done a lot of work on her, and she invents significs. Significs is the name that she gives to her theory of meaning. She also reflects on sciences and on signs and language. And she calls her theory significs, because she does not want it to be confused with semantics or with semiotics and a whole series of other sciences that already existed in her time, which was the 19th century. And in her significs, she thematizes, in fact, mother sense, which I connect to this idea of Levinas, this I other intrigue at the origin of sociality. It can also be associated to modeling, this primary modeling, syntactical modeling, characteristic of the human being. The architectonics, Bakhtin, the architectonics of responsibility. So, and in bio-semiotics, this originating condition of interconnectivity. Life evolves out of semiosis. Semioethics underlines this condition of becoming out of semiosis from the relationship among signs. And of course, in the human world, this is about looking at also the ethical, pragmatic dimension of semiosis. There are limitations are placed on otherness. Limitations are placed on responsibility. In fact, authors like Bakhtin and Levinas distinguish in their own language between limited, relative, if you're talking about otherness, relative otherness and absolute otherness, relative and absolute otherness, limited and unlimited responsibility. So limited responsibility is associated to relative otherness. Relative otherness is otherness connected to an identity. The duties of my role as a professor in the classroom, the duties of my role with respect to my relative alterity, that is, my alterity, my otherness, relative to your alterity, otherness as a student. So in social roles, we have responsibilities that are limited to the role that I am playing out in a given moment. Okay, the relative alterity and limited responsibilities of a doctor in the doctor-patient relationship, for example. And then you have absolute otherness, which transcends the limitations of a given identity. And absolute otherness opens to the sphere of singularity, the singularity of each one, beyond, transcendent with respect to one's identity in a given social role. So there are limits placed and have been placed on the human in the course of history, and limits are still placed, obviously, on identity, reducing and circumscribing the human capacity for responsibility. limitations are placed on responsibility not only when a question of non-human living beings, but even in the relation to human beings, in relations in human society, global human society. How do we produce limitations? How do we construct limits on identity? Through the application of distinctions, which very often are questionable when these distinctions are constructed according to the logic of identity. But I'm talking about closed identity, identity built on the sacrifice of the other, identity built not listening to, not keeping account of the other, which, as we have been saying, instead is the very condition for life to flourish, the otherness dimension. So such limitations are placed on the human community internally on the basis of assumed identities and differences, and allegedly different forms of belonging. There is one and there is another. There is our group and there are the group of the others. There is our lot, our destiny, and the destiny of others. There is me and there is the other. So consider what I'm saying. I mean, think of the world we're living in today. You're in Poland, some of you, we're in Europe, and the conflict between Ukraine and Russia is on our doorstep. At the moment, also, we have two big focuses of conflict, and they are not the only focuses of conflict in the world. They are the main, I'm talking now about Israel and genocide in Palestine. These are two important focuses in dominant communication channels, but the conflict has never ended and is global. There are many areas in the world suffering conflict, and we can talk about conflict between identities. So just let me to clarify, mention Charles Morris. Charles Morris is a semiotician who continued theorizing in semiotics after Charles Peirce. Charles Peirce, the American inventor of pragmatism, the greatest, I think, probably philosophical movement ever produced in the United States of America. So Charles Morris is subsequent to Peirce. So he adopts and elaborates on Peirce's sign theory, but Charles Morris publishes, whereas Peirce published very little in his lifetime, apart from dictionary and encyclopedia entries. Charles Morris published a few books. He was the first to hold a course in semiotics in America, and Thomas Sebeok was one of his students. Morris writes books in technical books in semiotics, but there's another line which is that which concerns the relationship between signs, the object of semiotics, and values, signs and values. And in fact, he authors a book in 1964 entitled Signification and Significance. And I encountered all this extraordinary world in semiotics, thanks to Ferruccio Rossilandi, who is an Italian semiotician and philosopher of language, who actually went to see Morris in the United States and translated him in Italian. For what concerns that line of development, line of thought on signs and values, the book Signification and Significance appeared in 1964. But before that, he had written another book called The Open Self, a book of 1984. And there he analyzed, I think that's 1948, after the Second World War. And he analyzes identity in semiotic terms and speaks of the open self, open identity, the open community, based on our analysis and understanding of the sign, right? Identity can be open identity. It recognizes, therefore, the other at the heart of identity, as Peirce had already done, the other as structural to identity, constitutive of identity. And that is healthy identity, that is capable, therefore, of listening to the other of self, the other from self. And the community, therefore, the identity is nothing else but a community, says Morris, a community of selves. One's own identity is a community of selves. Selves, therefore, that need to listen to each other if identity is healthy. And this is Peirce as well. The identity as a community as a metaphor, is an extension on the community as we understand it, the larger community, right? The larger community is an assemblage of many identities, of otherness, many othernesses, if you like. So Morris speaks about closed identity and open identity, the closed community and the open community, underlining, like Peirce before him, but also like the authors I've already mentioned to you, Seebeok, Morris, Levinas, Victoria Welby, underlining this condition of this dimension of otherness, which is structural to life and structural to human identity. And all this has a basis in our analysis of the sign, for example, as Charles Peirce proposes it, with the distinction between, he elaborates a whole lot of triads, for example. The most basic is that which distinguishes between the sign, the object, and the interpretant. So you have a sign is at minimal three apexes that relate to each other, and where, depending on the semiosis in course, these different apexes change roles. And that is the condition for semiosis to be ongoing, to continue. Therefore, the condition for life, this dynamics between parts in the sign, in semiosis, and the dynamics therefore, as the condition for life to flourish from whatever point of view, including in politics. So, I'll go back to the text. Limitations are placed on responsibility, not only when a question of non-human lives, but also human life. The problem is, from this point of view, this conception of identity, of difference, of individuality, as something separate from the other, instead of recognizing otherness as structural to identity, therefore as a condition for life. In the light of global semiotics, semioethics reveals how these forms of separatism inevitably end up becoming conflictual. When we construct identity, sacrificing the other, on the basis of sacrificing the other, inevitably identities become conflictual. They enter into competition with each other. And looking at things from the point of view of global semiotics, there is in fact no justification for the kind of conflict I'm talking about. This kind of conflict is damaging and a threat for human life overall, for life over the planet. And war is the demonstration of what I'm saying. Semioethics takes up and continues the task and the goal of one of the most ancient branches of semiotics in history. And here my reference is to semiotics. So semioethics, evolving from global semiotics in a sense, with global semiotics, remembers the origins, if you like, a possible origin of the semiotic of the general science, identifying it in medical semiotics. Medical semiotics with, for example, Hippocrates and Galen. This is just to circumscribe the narration, the narrative, because, we can also talk about semiotics, medical semiotics with Arabic culture much before then. But anyway, the point is that semiotics as semioethics recovers a lesson, an important lesson from medical semiotics. Medical semiotics objectivizes the object of medical semiotics is a particular kind of sign. What is that sign? The symptom. The name of the science already tells us that, symptomatology, medical semiotics or symptomatology. So medical semiotics or symptomatology analyzes the symptom. In medical semiotics or symptomatology, there is a practice, an important practice, called auscultation, in Italian auscultazione, auscultation, listening, right? So semioethics recovers that lesson from symptomatology and understands that semiotics, the sign sciences, the language sciences, need to refine their listening capacities, we need to put ourselves, this is the lesson for life, we need to put ourselves like the medical semioticians, symptomatologists, in a listening position, listening to the other, listening to signs of illness, signs of unease, social unease, malaise, difficulty, discomfort. I would say today crisis and emergency. The sciences are the sciences that read, that interpret signs, right? That's what semiotics is. So the language sciences, the sign sciences must enter into a listening mode and read the signs of malaise, of discomfort, of crisis in social reality, which is where we are, right? Semiosis and life in social reality. A listening attitude, the disposition for listening, again, I will repeat, is like the semiotics of music, is the disposition, the propensity of listening to what? to the other. Why? What is the point? What is the concern? As in medical semiotics, the dominant concern should be health, life itself, the capacity for life to flourish, the capacity for life to continue. So health and well-being, therefore, the concern to take our concern for life, to take responsibility, to take responsibility. This is a big theme also in Levinas. In Levinas and Bakhtin, they both thematize responsibility as listening, hospitality, encounter. Levinas talks about guilt, responsibility for the other to the point of taking the other's guilt upon my own shoulders. So semioethics, from this point of view, it can be connected to semiotics, symptomatology, and therefore, this explains, I suppose, the subtitle of this book I showed you before, La scienza dei segni in ascolto, the sciences in listening. That they actually need to consider listening as structural to as the sense of their own existence as sciences, as signed sciences. So semiotics is semioethics, and therefore semioticians and semioethicists can commit to the health of semiosis and cultivate the capacity for responsive, therefore responsible understanding towards the whole semiotic universe. And here I've introduced also, there's another concept when we talk about understanding and interpretation. This is another term that we need to see and understand in its complexity. I mean, we can respond. We are always responding to signs. The question is, how do we respond? Do we respond in a limited way, according to closed identity? I identify something and leave it at that. Or do I respond with Bakhtin? Bakhtin talks about responsive understanding, interpretation, understanding that is responsive, that goes beyond the limitations of identity. If I ask you, what time is it? So, somebody responds saying, what time is it? And doesn't give me the information though I need. Somebody else understands and says, it's late, depending on the context. It's late. It's 5 o'clock. The train leaves at 7:30. Come on, let's go. I'll accompany you. So you have a kind of understanding, which we can call responsive understanding, where there is a situation of co-implication, of co-participation, of involvement. Bakhtin would talk about dialogical, responsive understanding, dialogical, responsive co-implication. So semiotics commits to the health of semiosis and cultivates, as semioethics, the capacity for responsible understanding towards the semiotic universe. Metasemiosis, what we were talking about before, is a condition for global responsibility, the capacity that we have as a very special animal species, the human animal species. We are endowed with semiosis, therefore with a capacity to understand global responsibility not limited to a single identity, but responsibility capable of transcending the limitations of a given identity. The capacity for listening to the other. In this situation, we're talking about the need for an indifferent difference. It's not enough to recognize the presence of differences, right? The multiplicity. We need to develop a culture of unindifference or non-indifference towards the other. A culture of unindifference, of non-indifference is absolutely towards differences, is absolutely necessary for the health of semiosis, for the health, for the possibility of living together in a possible world where we are called to live together. We could talk about differences in terms of identity, and in fact, I talk about identity difference, but we can also talk about difference in terms of singularity, rather than identity difference, which is difference that closes in its own borders. Alterity difference. Alterity difference is identity capable of listening to the other, and therefore of going to that encounter with the other. Otherness that transcends the boundaries of closed identity. So the semiotician's interest in symptoms, as we're talking about social symptomatology. I like that expression. Like semioethics, like semiotics, reads symptoms and can read them in the key, in a symptomatological key as symptoms of social crisis, social problems, social unease. So the semiotician's interest in symptoms bears a certain resemblance to Freudian analysis, given the central role played by interpretation in both cases, and the inclination to listen to the other, which is decisive for interpretation. So, in fact, we can distinguish, as I was saying before, between the interpretation based on identity, the identification interpretant, call it that, and interpretation based on otherness and responsiveness. The interpretant of responsive understanding, which is an interpretant sensitive, open to the other. But listening here is not understood in the medical sense. To listen to the other is not to auscultate simply. If semiotic or semioethic analysis of symptoms is similar to Freudian analysis, it shares nothing with the practice of institutionalized and medicalized psychiatry, with medicalized and psychiatrized psychoanalysis, with psychiatric patients, psychiatric treatment, administration of drugs, and sundry concoctions. In other words, the semioethic interpretation of symptoms shares nothing with the medicalization and psychiatrization of life as practiced in evermore in today's globalized world. Listening to symptoms is not auscultation in that sense. Here, there is a critique against the institutionalization, let's say, of life, of medicine. And here I will recall the work of psychiatrists like Thomas Satz. Thomas Satz in America. He was of Hungarian origin, author of that revolutionary book of the 60s, The Myth of Mental Illness. In Italy, I would also recall Sergio Piro, a Neapolitan psychiatrist. Both psychiatrists are examples of the discourse I am proposing here. We're not talking about medicalization of society. We're not talking about the institutionalization of languages and of psychiatry, of psychoanalysis. We're talking about the capacity of listening and, if anything, the need to critique the imposition of a certain way of understanding the relationship between the doctor, the psychoanalyst or the psychiatrist, and patient. Far too easily, there is recourse to drugs, to medicalization, which is an institution that psychiatrists and psychoanalysts like Satz and Sergio Piro were very, very critical of. They criticize coercion, psychiatry as coercion, and also pharmacracy. How can I say that? The imperialism of a culture of abuse in terms of using recourse to drugs, to medicine. The empire, let's say, it's in the industry of medicine, which is superimposed on the relationship between the psychiatrist or psychoanalyst and the patient, and which replaces the listening relationship, listening in terms of hospitality and responsive understanding in the relationship between I and other. Victoria Welby also, Victoria Welby also talks about, you're talking about her significs. He introduces the concept of significs as diagnosis. Analogically, she talks about she thematizes mother sense, and therefore also theory of meaning, distinguishing between, I won't go into this now, she distinguishes different levels of meaning, sense, meaning, and significance. And here too, she insists on the need to become aware of the significance that live communication produces, the listening attitude towards our signs, the signs we produce. Her interest is mainly in verbal language, and she, I'll just cite this from Victoria Welby. Her book, published in 1903, entitled What is Meaning? It is unfortunate that custom decrees the limitation of the term diagnosis to the pathological field. It would be difficult to find a better term for that power of knowing through. Diagnosis evokes the image of listening and knowing, knowing through, which a training in significs would carry. Her theory of meaning, significs, is a theory that insists on interrogating sense significance, the ultimate sense significance for me, for whoever is uttering a given expression. We must be brought up to take for granted that we are diagnosts. In fact, education is important for Victoria Welby. A training in critical thinking. This is what she's talking about. A training in developing a critical linguistic consciousness. And therefore, the need to develop critical awareness apart from, before making decisions and taking standpoints. So we are to cultivate the power to see real distinctions, and to read signs. And distinctions does not mean separatism. Distinctions means to recognize and see distinctions and to see the connection between distinctions and not create walls and barriers. This is where we can detect sense and meaning. Diagnostic may be called the typical process of significs, as translation is its typical form. And this is a whole dimension, very interesting, the whole concept of translation, which I won't go into now. So there is a pivotal question in semioethics is why should each human being, each identity, but the word singularity is better, why should we be responsible for semiosis, for life over the whole planet? Why and in what sense? And here we can distinguish between a traditional understanding of ethics and morality, if you like, and semioethics. The distinction is between ethics or morality as a categorical imperative. From the point of view of ethics, we don't necessarily have to answer the question, why do I have to be responsible for the other? Why am I responsible for life? Ethics, morality imposes a categorical imperative. Semioethics wants to show, as I've been trying to do, in this small space of time that we have, semioethics wants to convince us, the other, that accounting for the other, to the other, is a scientific necessity. It cannot be avoided, and looks into the scientific side of this condition of responsibility. From the point of view of semioethics, the question does require an answer. Unlike ethics, semioethics involves scientific research, argumentation, interpretation, a dialogic response, regulated by the logic of otherness and questioning. It formulates a definition of the human being as a semiotic animal, which implies a semioethic animal. The semiotic animal is capable of semioethics, of cultivating, of awareness, and of cultivating that awareness concerning the relationship between signs and values. Signs, as Mikhail Bakhtin teaches us, are always accentuated. Signs in the properly human world, signs in properly human semiosis. The word is always accentuated. The word is always intonated. What does that mean? The word is always oriented by the other. The word is always oriented by listening. The word is, from this point of view, first of all, listening. If you consider what we're doing now, or what you all do in your own spheres in your own professions. If you're teaching, for example, you can't just walk into a situation and, churn off something without considering your listeners, the people, the public, the people who are there and listening. The commitment is, the engagement is to try and connect with the people you are speaking, not to, but for. When we communicate with others, we communicate for others, in the company of others, in whatever discourse genre. In this sense, the word is intonated, is oriented. Communication is oriented by the other. You just cannot get away from the other. That's the truth. The other is inevitable. And in fact, as I said before, Levinas speaks of the inevitable, inextricable condition of entanglement with the other. Here's something on Levinas. According to Levinas, the sense of human life, the properly human, we can talk about human, we can talk about, when we talk about anthroposemiosis, semiosis in the human world, there are different dimensions, obviously. I mean, we can talk about the metabolism, at the level of the organic, simply, of the metabolic, and that's one dimension of semiosis. Now I'm talking about the properly human. So this is the human in sociality, the human in the I other intrigue. So the properly human is founded on responsibility of the I for the other. In Levinas's description, responsibility is more ancient than the conatus essendi, than beginnings in principium. Responsibility is anarchical. It does not have an arche, prior to being and to ontological categories. This type of responsibility is not stated. We have mentioned this before. This type of responsibility, anarchical responsibility, is not stated in ontological categories, which is why it's difficult to understand. The shortcoming of modern anti-humanism, as Levinas says in the conclusion of an essay of 1968 titled Humanism and Anarchy, is in not finding in the human, lost in history and in the totality, the traces of this condition, this prehistorical condition of anarchical responsibility. Responsibility for the other is the original relation with the other and is unlimited, absolute responsibility. Responsibility, thus described, is the secret of sociality. Have a look. Continue. Encounter with the other from the very beginning, in principium, is responsibility for the other, for one's neighbor, whomever this is, the other for whom one is responsible. As Levinas says in Entre nous, precisely in the section entitled Philosophy, Justice and Love, love as an indifference, non-indifference, love as charity. Love is original and is original peace. Absolute responsibility is responsibility for the other, responsibility understood as answering to the other and for the other. This type of responsibility allows for neither rest nor peace. Peace functional to war, peace intrinsic to war, a truce, is fully revealed in its misery and vanity in the light of absolute responsibility. And here we can, talking about peace, we make a difference. Peace as a function of war. Maurice Blanchot talks about the madness of the day, rest as a function of work, rest as a function of the day. I need to sleep. I need to rest so that I can continue being functional, right? Continue as a function of the day, of work, of everything I'm called to do in the day as a worker. And then there is rest, which is something else, which transcends, let's say, the day and its identities and its duties. Rest as time for the other, rest as time for myself as other, for the time of otherness. And this is Levinas when he speaks about peace, not as truce, as the interruption between one war and another war and the next war, peace in preparation for the next war, but peace, absolute peace, peace beyond war, peace beyond the boundaries, therefore, of identity. Peace functional to war, peace intrinsic to war, a truce, is fully revealed in all its misery. This is the kind of peace that we are used to. And in fact, peace in this world, in this particular social economic system called globalization, is preparation for war, as we can see. Look at the war industry. It is flourishing. You know, it's a beauty. The war industry is fundamental to the health of this, from an economical point of view, of this system that we call globalization and global capital. The relation to the other is asymmetrical, unequal. The other is disproportionate with respect to the power and freedom of the I. Moral consciousness is this very lack of proportion. I could call this a semioethical consciousness. It interrogates the self's freedom. I am responsible for the other as the other is not responsible for me. I am responsible for a child dying of hunger in this world, as that child cannot be for me. So the concept again of unlimited responsibility returns. General semiotics, conceived in the framework of global semiotics, presents itself as a meta-science which overcomes artificial separations. This is separations between the sciences, separation between human sciences and natural sciences, separation among identities, among the people, separation among politics and the people. Thus interpreted, general semiotics favors a transversal and interdisciplinary approach to the sciences, what I would call a dialogical approach to the sciences and to life, the life that sciences study, evidencing against this culture of separation, this culture based on identity with its boundaries, its borders, the walls that it builds. We need to evidence the original condition of interconnectivity, whether we're coming from the biological sciences or from the philosophical, linguistic, semiotical, general semiotical sciences.